You're watching Hearthstone Grandmasters, and you're just in time for the first match of the day. It's Sunday, of course, so that means the finals day for our second week, so it should be a little bit more of a palatable day of Hearthstone all around in terms of the length of broadcast, I think it's fair to say. And our first match is going to be tom60229 up against Tyler. Tom with his slightly off-the-wall lineup in terms of his brings, with the Zoo Warlock thrown in there that most people would not trust in. But Tyler, in his own right, has a slightly different lineup to what most people would expect.
That's right. Druid saw a definite downsurge in its bring rate because of that nerf to Kael'thas. Tyler has still brought it, but is going in the direction of cutting Kael'thas altogether and having the Mount Sellers in there as a more consistent play on turn 7. However, the consistency is hurt a little bit because to make room for the broomsticks, you're cutting one copy of Crystal Power.
That's right, yeah. It does make for a somewhat unfocused list, I suppose you could say. Maybe not the final iteration quite yet. But one thing that I do fully agree on is the power of animated broomstick, specifically when you have double Lake Thresher in the deck. Despite broomstick being a very flexible card, the Thresher for me is the real kicker. That's where you can just clear off boards that Druid has absolutely no business being able to clear, what with it supposedly being weak on removal as a class overall. But one thing that I do want to get your opinion on right out the gate is just the rogue ban. This is one of the very, very few rogue bans that we've seen all week, whether it be off stream on the Swiss or on broadcast the last couple of days. And it does seem like it's maybe well positioned, but definitely not the intuitive ban.
Yeah, based on Tom's ban history, he has banned Rogue a couple of times, including his matches in the Swiss.
Okay.
He has never banned Priest, however. He's banned Teacher before Priest and Warrior a couple times, but mainly when his opponents are not running Rogue. So it feels to me like Tom prioritizes Rogue and even Demon Hunter as the ban priorities. One time he left up Demon Hunter was when he faced Shaxi, which had a not-so-conventional Demon Hunter list whatsoever. Could be that Tom is just not confident facing down the Rogue beatdown because it gets going a lot faster than, say, Bomb Warrior.
Yes, yeah. I think the main thing that people underestimate against Rogue is that I'm on the brink of wanting to call it like anti-control Rogue, because it is an aggro deck, but it's one that really struggles, in my experience, against the other aggro decks because it doesn't have the best tempo swings when you're some of the lists are taking out backstab. You know, you don't have most of the kind of tempo swinging spells that Rogue usually has access to. But it's great against the control decks because you equip a self-sharpening sword, get it up to like 10 attack, and then just kill them very swiftly unless they have an ooze.
And the ooze is right there for Tom, but for the Bomb Warrior matchup, where I'd argue it is just as, if not even more, relevant. We saw Tyler prove why he believes in not banning Warrior and instead prioritizing Priest, as he absolutely destroyed Possessi with consecutive weapon removal from the Ooze, from Zephyrus, from Raised Dead. We could see a similar story going on, but Tyler has already drawn all three of his weapons, and Tom currently has just the one Ooze.
That's right. It's already a very interesting situation because, again, Tyler isn't playing Horde Pillager, which is the big kicker in the matchup. Because if Tom is able to find Zephyrus or Raised Dead to resurrect his acidic Swamp Ooze, that's both of the Wrench Calibers gone. And as we saw yesterday, that pretty much deletes the win condition from Tyler's entire deck.
And this Mind Vision is low-key tons of information for Tom now. He knows that on top of the currently equipped, the second one is there for Tyler. So Tom might be hesitating about ripping the first Ooze immediately. Not to mention the Ooze is not a great usage of his mana, so it looks like we're just going to see the Wrench Caliber thrown back the other way. And in terms of timing your Ooze, it can be very difficult unless your opponent has stacked more than one charge on their weapon. But given that Tyler was able to get the first swing in and he'll be swinging every single time from here on out, it's not a given that he would have more than one charge at every single time. But now that there's an upgrade played, Tom might be more confident in going for the Ooze on this weapon.
Yes, I'd have to imagine so, especially as Tyler's committed two of the big upgrade tools in Upgrade itself and Dr. Krastenov. You throw it down, and then again, you just pray that you can find Zephyrus or Raised Dead to deal with the second one before you're dying. Because again, it's worth mentioning is the other tool that you can use in Warrior if your Wrench Calibers are destroyed is Galakron itself. Being able to equip that and just go for 3 damage to the face every single turn eventually does seem to have a good chance of destroying the Priest. But without that in the list for Tyler, again, it's looking rough unless this second Wrench Caliber can do an incredible amount of work.
That's right. It's a big deal, though, that Tyler managed to get down both the cutting class for free on the turn that he did, because even though this first ooze came down, has a bit more consistency to follow up. He has the boom on the next turn and Deathwing for after that. So even though Tom had the answer for the first weapon, he needs to... Tyler's just asking a ton more questions turn after turn.
And I think rightly so. You know, he's seen the first ooze. You can wait for as long as you want to try and find second upgrade or Captain Greenskin in order to get an immediate buff. But I think the point at which they're least likely to have the extra weapon removal is always now. It's always the soonest possible time that you can throw down the weapon and then hope they are unable to clear it off.
That's right. And Tyler, of course, just prioritizing getting the maximum number of bombs in the deck. Early Dr. Boom. Turn, he had the option of setting up a Risky Sipper preemptively, but I think it's to the point where you'd rather get the maximum amount of bombs instead of having them go off all immediately, because Tom has managed to stay at a full 30 health.
And to be fair to Tyler, despite facing down an ooze and having used up multiple of his upgrade tools, as I mentioned, he's got the Dr. Boom down on time. He has a decent hand. Zephyrus still a while off, of course, but still powerful when it does come down for maybe a Tyrion, a Doomhammer, if he can finagle it to work in that way, perhaps.
This turn for Tom is crucial about how he wants to go about removing things. The Kel'Thuzad Shadow or Death looks pretty tempting just to get rid of the boom and re-summon it. It depends on how much Tom wants to respect these boom bots, because there's also, of course, a Soul Mirror option. I tend to prefer just the Kel'Thuzad Shadow or Death because it leaves Tom with a board, whereas he might just be ceding initiative to Tyler if he goes for a Soul Mirror.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, the thing is that this 3-6 coming taunt as well is a pretty big deal in terms of being able to fight back against all the bomb activations. But in the end, he's just saying, let's play some bomb ping pong here and see what happens.
Yeah, with the amount of bombs going off, I would have to say it is optimistic to hope that the taunt survives. But you could be... Wow. Wait a sec. Why did that deal so much more damage to Tyler?
Because it's tom60229. That's how it works.
Tom had one less bomb as well because he had one less board space.
Yeah.
That is pretty crazy.
Well,
and now suddenly bombs in Tyler's deck become kind of relevant to think about.
That's true. No Armor Smith yet does mean that the health gain is a little ways off, of course.
Well, while I was advocating for saving Soul Mirror and going Kel'Thuzad, if the follow-up Tom expects from Tyler is just the one big minion on turn 8, say this Deathwing in hand, then it works out even better for Tom, because then he goes Kel'Thuzad, Shadow Word Death on an empty board.
Okay, a few ways to work around this from Tom. We could just see if he wants to go as aggressive onto the board as possible and try and win the game right now. Like you were talking about, Kel'Thuzad plus Shadow of Death is a great way to swing the board back in his favor. And even if Brawl does come down there, it's not that bad. He gets a 4-6 in the worst case.
Yeah, absolutely like it from Tom. This is one of the few situations where Priest can be very aggressive. Tyler not with a shield block in hand at the moment, nor Armor Smith for some burst healing. Oh my goodness!
Ooh.
That was the only bomb back for Tyler so far. Okay, Bladestorm Coerce can get the work done here. But Tyler is just... I mean, Tom is almost in a swing now, right? Because there's a chance to just win the game if it's the one bomb off the top.
Yeah, it's the perfect odds. I mean, also equipping Galakron and potentially going for Kronks next turn. Even Shadow Madness, that's another 3 damage that can go face. This is just aggro Priest, forget Highlander.
Yep, I completely agree. It's not often that you'll get put in this type of spot as Priest, but with the fortunate bomb outcomes and the fact that Tom has had this Wrench Caliber and the Gala Kronks, it definitely looks like a smart game plan for me.
And I think it's really worth talking about what you said there in the fortunate bomb outcome, because that really was the turning point for Tom this game. It was whether he clears with Soul Mirror on the Blastmaster Boom, or he leaves the boom bots where they are. And obviously it was a very fortunate outcome with bombs. It's unlikely to result in exactly this outcome, or anywhere close to this good. But it does mean he gets some damage to the face, and it opens up an aggressive win condition that he can try and go for in the next few turns. And he's been massively rewarded for that.
And while Tyler does have this armor to stack up and get out of range of just the Kronk's hero power, Tom now, because Tyler has to spend that little bit of mana every turn to gain that armor, Tom might have more freedom to press that hero power and put down some minions to support the smart game plan.
And again, even if Tom wants to here, he could put Tyler in bomb lethal range with Kronk's Shadow Madness, in order to swing around the deckhand. It's probably not quite worth it here, but the opportunity is always there.
Yeah, it's worth pointing out, I think, that makes more sense to hold on to that, of course, as a surprise for Tyler. And it's always going to deal 5 at some point if you wanted to, but it makes sense to hold on for if you'd rather have the 8/8. Crucially, though, that Alexstrasza is, of course, shut down because of the multiple bombs in Tom's deck. The Zephyrus is active because there's just one bomb in Tyler's deck.
That's right. Armorsmith being picked up is a huge draw for a multitude of reasons. Obviously, the armor gain that it can accrue with Risky Skipper and crew. But just Zephyrus being activated is huge. Being able to go for, stealing with Cabal Shadow Priest on Amit if he wants to. Or just Tyrion.
Yeah. It does put a roadblock in the way from Tom, and Tyler had seen the Shadow Madness already, but now we could see Wave of Apathy Shadow Madness. Is there a way to kill off the Tyrion in Tom's favor and get the Ashbringer?
Yes, there is.
Forbidden Words? Yes. Isn't that just 10 damage right now?
Can he kill off... Oh no, wait, the deckhand inside won't have charge.
Well, if you have the Ashbringer, but you can't get the Tyrion and the deckhand.
Yeah, it's like one
he's
off.
just spending the rest of his mana in order to get that Forbidden Words for the least extra mana used.
Yep, Tyler can just dip out of that one whenever he pleases, because that was Priest doing what Priest does. And also, I think a pretty good example of why we have seen Tyler banning Priest so far. It's a matchup with specific regard to a Bomb Warrior versus Highlander Priest that I'm really having to shift my perspective on. If you're not running the extra Horde Pillagers in order to get multiple activations of the Wrench Caliber, or if you're not running Galakrond in order to get that extra damage over the finish line, I think Priest has got a really good chance of actually winning that matchup, arguably even favored.
Derek, it's just so funny you're opposing Tyler no matter what he does. Yesterday, he was banning a bunch of Priests, and we're like, maybe he should be banning Warrior. And today he bans Warrior, and now you're like, he should be banning Priest. I really don't know, but just based off of the crowd mentality, I understand why Tyler would shift to a Warrior ban for today.
Yeah, I mean, he told me specifically that he is banning Tom's Warrior because of the Horde Pillagers. He feels that his Priest can dominate the Warrior if there are no Horde Pillagers, because he runs Ooze, Zephyrus, Raise Dead, the usual package, in order to remove all the Wrench Calibers. But when you throw in Horde Pillagers in there as well, it becomes nigh on impossible to stop them from getting multiple swings to the face over the course of the game. So I think it's correct from Tyler. I definitely think he's gone with the right strategy here. It's just an unfortunate downside in that now he has to try and counteract Priest, which, now that his Rogue is out of the way, he's relying on only his Druid and the mirror match of Priest. It could start to go downhill very quickly.
Definitely worth pointing out that Tom's ban makes more sense in retrospect now that, looking at his Warrior list, if he expected to get banned, then he knew that his Priest would be possibly the ace deck, and the best chance Tyler would have of beating that would be with the Rogue. So now, today, a lot more like specific LHS ban strategies are coming into play compared to the other days, where it was maybe more of a case of, let me bring the 4 best decks and ban what I think is my opponent's best deck. It's not to say that Druid has an extremely hard time versus Priest. I think this matchup is very winnable for the Druid, but certain draws from Priest, if they're able to get past one wave and have a timely Murazon, for example, it can get really tough to come back on board for Druid. Tyler's list in particular, with one survival of the fittest, but the Mount Sellers in there, it gives it a little bit more gas. I think you would rather have more waves of threats instead of more buffs stacking onto the current threats.
Yeah. Already a tough choice here for Tyler, because the curve is very smooth if he goes Fate Growth, Overgrowth, up to 7 mana. But then if you take it a step further with the Ysera in hand, if he goes Wild Growth and then Overgrowth on 5 mana, that'll boost him to 8. So then he can go Vate Ysera in 2 turns time, which is a very powerful combo, or I suppose 3 turns time, but you would have to delay for a turn. So instead he prioritizes the tempo option here of just getting them down, getting the mana as quick as possible, and ends up getting a Lightning Bloom anyway, so it's going to be an early Ysera no matter what.
And Tom can see how much trouble he's going to be in starting the next turn.
Yes.
I think the original line from Tyler, of course, not knowing you would get Lightning Bloom also is fine, because he would give himself a time during that window where you can't play Ysera yet to play the Twilight Runner. Get that developed, and hopefully stay stealth for long enough that when Ysera comes down, it can attack and start the draws and get the dragons down ASAP.
However, that is not going to go to plan for Tyler, who is met with the perfect answer to steal the Twilight Runner. He's going to have to rely on just the natural draws from Ysera to dig him out of this hole, which is it's a deep one.
It is. That was absolutely huge for Tom. Tyler, of course, still has to play that Ysera, but yeah, it's going to be really tough. We're looking at the overflows in terms of other card draw effects. It's just the other Twilight Runner plus, I suppose, those ramp cards. Oh, man. Whereas Tom has endless card draw and the ramp for himself, so he could just play out the Galakrond to remove this Ysera if he likes.
I mean, what he could go for that. He could go for Mind Flayer, Bloom, Forbidden Words if he wants to go for like having the 4/12 Ysera inside his Kaj.
You could even see something like pre-develop the Headmaster Kel'Thuzad and then go for a Forbidden play for the next turn.
I don't even know what's best.
Yeah. I mean, looking at this Kronk, I like the idea of getting the Galakrond down while it's guaranteed to snipe a good target. And even though Kronks won't be available for the mana next turn, in 2 turns time, you could just be a lethal setup.
Alright, that's a portal. Tyler's maybe in with a chance. That's an innovate, though.
It's just Thresher, gain 1. Oh no. I didn't even realize Tyler was below half HP at this point, staring down 10 on the board. There's an Apotheosis. Tyler just needs 3 damage. Not going to be doable with the amount of mana he has, unless it's exactly Zephyrus, but I don't think Tyler can do this in 1 turn.
I mean, I guess you just, go for the killing off of the Thresher so he can't clear your board so easily. I can see. Yikes!
Oh.
Well, that was a quick couple of games to start the day off here. Tom 2-0 up now with the Priest. And you've got to imagine, even with Tyler having strong reasoning behind switching up his ban strategy, going for the Warrior instead, instantly getting 2-0'd by the Priest in one of the most dominating couple of games I think I've ever seen, I think quite quickly has to put some doubts in your mind as to whether or not it was the way to go.
It's a small sample size. I feel like Tom's draws have been on point. Tyler shouldn't be thinking that he absolutely made the wrong ban strategy. It could just be the luck of the draw sometimes. But I just find it funny that at the beginning of the broadcast, you said it's going to be a more palatable day. In APAC, it's very, very digestible, the amount of matches we have, because they tend to go very fast. Today, with only 3 matches, and if one of them even becomes a sweep, it might be over in a blink of an eye.
I mean, this is an amuse-bouche and nothing more of a day of GM. There is no meat so far on these bones, unless, however, Tyler can turn things around with a full reverse sweep on the Highlander Priest. Sorry, he's shown great proficiency with the deck thus far. I think playing a huge amount of the deck on ladder, but still, it's going to have to be a steep climb to 3-0 all of Tom's remaining decks.
Glad to hear you've caught my bug of comparing the day to various foods. It's a very effective metaphor. And I don't know how to spell amuse bouche, but I'm pretty sure that's the little finger foods you get before Kaiser even happens.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a nice little mouth pleaser. We should try and get Subtle to say that in his next Learning French video.
Well, in any case, Tyler started off with the Raised Dead Keep. What you definitely want for ideally Zephyrus, but even as a value generator for the Vulpera Scoundrels, it's nothing to scoff at, especially when the Scoundrel itself gets you another Raised Dead.
Yeah, you're
Snap. Pick, right?
Is the self-damage of any concern at all? I guess it's just the best card there, isn't it?
It's a tiny concern, I suppose, for this early on in the game. And Tyler being the first one to get a minion on board, I don't think has to be very afraid of taking face damage. Right? I'm gonna start off the Sethic. I think that people underestimate the value of tempo. The importance of tempo in the mirror these days. The Sethic, previously, you would want to hold on to that for dear life in the mirror to get the most amount of spells. But nowadays, because there is just a curve run, we see this Cabal Acolyte, there's the Cobalt Spellkin, and the ever-looming threat of Apotheosis, or even the generated buff cards like Power Feast, Power Infusion is very relevant. That's why we see Tom go for that Ethic, and why we see Tyler going for an aggressive Pyro to clear off the board.
Yeah, and getting the third Raised Dead before he's even hit turn 5 of the game, and Tom throws down the clap. I mean, you're never running out of value from here for Tyler. These 3 Vulperas have a pretty good chance of getting another Raised Dead at this point.
Yeah, he's just playing Pain Warlock now because he pays his life total to just have endless value. Oh my goodness.
I mean,
well,
do you remember
I'll
that?
Tell you what, the pool is very, very diluted now. Tyler's Raised Deads might just be getting these 2 cards for the rest of the game. So you see him pick up now Plague of Death instead.
I mean, there was that spate of a few years where every single game, oh my god, with another Raised Dead, every single game was a zombie game that seemed to come out. And it turns out Hearthstone has finally been infected as well. As every single minion is being resurrected here from the dead. What is going on?
Tyler can't believe it himself. Did they adjust the... did they adjust the frequency of these cards to favor dual class cards? There's another one, Wave of Apathy, but given that he has a bunch of spells, I was looking at the Wave of Apathy instead, but given that the rest of the hand is very reactive anyway, Tyler just takes Thought Steal. I don't even know what you're supposed to pick here. Looks like Tyler isn't sure either.
Yeah, I mean, value doesn't seem like a bad idea. Like you said, tempo is very important, but Tyler, I think, can quite clearly, very happily transition over to a slightly more controlling game plan. With double Plague of Death, Thought Steal, Alex Straza. Like, he wants to extend the game a little bit further, I think it's fair to say. So I'm okay with these value options.
Yep. If only he had the hand space to work with it. It's getting to the point where we could just see the Shadow Madness and Breath of the Infinite played out. So the Cabal trades into the Vulpera. It does blow up Tyler's own board, because you'd have to trade your own Vulpera first, and then steal, trade again, and then Breath of the Infinite.
Well,
but if Tyler's game... Sorry? Yeah?
He has a dragon, right? So it would only damage Tom's side of the board.
Oh yeah, that's my bad. In any case, though, it would take several cards to go through. And, even though you wouldn't want to be using Shadow Madness, ideally that lightly, like people want to save it for a card, for example, it's getting to the point where Tyler wants to free up space to make sure he gets actual value out of his cards.
Yeah, that's going to be a nice, easy Galakron to snipe off Kel'Thuzad before any kind of headmastery nonsense can occur.
And while the Alexstrasza can come down this turn for Tom, it is always scary to put cheap cards in your hand. You can't play them immediately.
That's true.
Because of Elusia. Which Tom now knows is in Tyler's hand. Okay, this is where things get wonky.
I mean, it has been staggering, the consistency with which Render Elusia absolutely turns casters' brains to mush. Every region, every series, there are no exceptions. None of us have figured this out yet. Most
and
of the
Tyler
players
knows
haven't
there's
either.
a chance that Tom stole his Elusia, so I doubt we're gonna see... I mean, we're not gonna see Alexstrasza because there's no space. The Murazond is okay, but he can't clear off the Evasive Worm because he can't target it with Holy Smite. It could just be a low-value Plague of Death. I don't know the sound of that.
You think this is your time?
Okay.
It is not.
The future is clear. Your demise be near.
Right. Can't deal with the 5-3 immediately, so he is just going for more board presence and giving Tom a similar problem. That's fair.
One thing that I didn't even necessarily realize at the time, but there is quite a big decision from Tom, is you were just talking about how Dragon Queen Alexstrasza is scary, because now that the dragons cost 1 mana, you can't dump them both out in the same turn, and for fear of Render Elusia. But after he played Lazul, saw that Elusia was in hand, he then played the dragon that was discounted off of Draconic Studies, which means he can't play out all the dragons from Dragon Queen Alexstrasza in the turn, whereas if he'd saved back on the Evasive Feyworm, he could have gone with Dragon Queen Alexstrasza plus both the dragons on the same turn, which I think was very arguably worth the lack of tempo from not playing the dragon on that turn.
Arguably. I mean, there's something to be said for averaging the value of dragons. On the 10 mana turn, you can still just play 1 with Alexstrasza, and Tom might be fine with giving Tyler 1 cheap dragon. It's really tough to say, but it's for sure that if he had not played the Evasive Worm, it was essentially giving Tyler free reign to dictate the board state.
Okay.
Life and hope are worth fighting.
Well, first one comes down.
Whoa. And it's a biggie.
Not want to play Deathwing.
No. Okay. So now, immediately, in terms of answers, Tom's brain has to be going haywire. It's like Render Elusia to try and steal the other dragon in hand. First of all, should he go Zephrys so as to not give Zephrys to his opponent? But then what do you go for to kill off the Mali and also the Dragon Queen Alexstrasza that kind of has to die? There's so many things to think about. He just rips the Elusia.
Oh my, I was not expecting that whatsoever. Because now he gives Zephrys to the other side at the only thing he knew he would get is that 1-cost dragon, and there aren't very many that can deal with a Malagos on the other side.
Well, he knew a couple of things, right? Because he had played the Lazul, so he knew what Apotheosis, Raised Dead, and Mind Render, I think, were the 3 options.
And the Raised Dead Apotheosis isn't getting very much done, so essentially, it's lucky for Tom that there's this Shadow Word Death here, and then he can just clear off the board with the Deathwing.
Quickly.
But then he'll have to contend with his Zephrys on the other side.
Yeah,
end with Elusia, right? You can go Deathwing and then end with
Oh my
Elusia.
god.
Yeah.
Was this the plan all along? Oh my god, this is too complicated.
I mean, it's sick, is what happens.
So now he gets his Zephrys back without even having to play it. Tyler gets his own garbage hand, and then at the end of the turn, they're just going to swap back to normal? It's going to double swap?
Wait. I don't know how a double Elusia turn works, Dark, I have to admit. Are they
it will go swap, right?
Okay, so this is the nuts for Tom, because Tyler's best response to this is Plague of Death.
This
and
was
then Tom just
insane.
refills with his Alexstrasza. Yeah.
This was god tier.
It was.
What does he do? Like, you just Plague of Death the board away, and then you've lost all your value?
I mean, he has second Plague of Death. He has no other choice but to do this. It's not over. He has Raised Dead. And he can pick up, that most likely outcome of the 2 minions that died a bunch of times this game. But Tyler has been shaking his head because Tom absolutely switcherooed the heck out of this.
Yep, swap, swap, double Elusia. I am getting justifiably roasted for not knowing exactly how that interaction worked. Fair enough. In our chat, as another Mind Render Elusia is picked up. No way now for Tyler to swap the decks because his own Elusia has been stolen by Tom. Insane.
That's a relevant pickup, though. And we were talking about how Tom had insane refill, or at least the value in hand. But strangely enough, Tyler's early pick of a second Plague of Death and then the top deck Soul Mirror gives him the type of hand to contend. It's also the fact that Tom picked up specifically Nazar doesn't want to revive Tyler to full health. That might make things a little bit awkward.
Well, that's Plague of Death number 2 taken out of the way, so I think Tom has free reign to start really developing onto the board now.
But what's the best way of doing that? Because he doesn't want a Nazari.
Great question.
Zephrys he would rather save for Burst, I can only imagine. And the other options are, I guess, this Tempo Shadow, Cabal Shadow piece.
Can he, like, make Zephrys give him Doomhammer? No, I guess Doomhammer's not even that good. I'm just trying to think of ways to kill Tyler.
I was thinking of that as well. I think Zephrys is weighted a bit more towards Doomhammer if your opponent's at a low health total, but now that he's healed, we can see he's not committing to that, going for a board-based game plan instead. And the fact that Tom's hand also has tons of reactive tools make this a bit more clear to me, especially since he got rid of Tyler's value. He's now switching back to a more value-oriented game plan.
Well, speaking of value-oriented, Draconic Studies does sound pretty good as a way to get another big threat.
Wretched Tutor has the AoE in its Spell Burst. With Holy Nova, it can get through a decent chunk of this board. Actually, with just a trade on it, Holy Nova. But Tom for sure wants to be trying to get the best use out of this board. We're not sure if he believes the best use is by buffing it, say with Zephrys,
right,
or just by going very, very slowly. But between this turn and last, it seems that Tom just wants to take this to the long game, and it's justifiable to do that because he has a second Elusia, or third Elusia even in hand.
Yeah, I mean, it gets really weird because he kind of wants to go like Elusia, and then he could steal Inner Fire. Obviously, he doesn't know that, though, and then goes Zephrys Wind Fury, but he would have then given Tyler the Zephrys at that point. So it doesn't quite work out as the way you would want it.
And for Tyler, now that he's seen Tom go a little bit slower, I wonder if he's thinking of a way to take this to the long game, which is also just of thinking because he was the first to Galakron by a long margin, so he could be generating a bunch of minions in this time. The 4-12 is always going to be scary because he's not seen Zephrys yet, so that could become a 12-12 at any point.
Your head isn't as empty as it looks.
Hero Power made sense. With the amount of time that he had already gone through, I can't imagine it was going to be a Sethek train turn. Educated guess from Tyler there, I believe.
Yeah, I can't remember him ever having concretely seen that in hand.
It's fair to rule out Galakron because that's probably would have been played if it were in hand.
Yeah, I mean, I take it back as well, right? Because the hand swapped earlier with Elusia, so I think he probably did know that that was just in hand at that point.
That's still impressive to keep track of that after double swap.
Yes, of course. It's almost more impressive. Okay, so that is a stolen Karj with a nice big minion inside it that Tyler has to find a way to steal back, ideally, which he cannot do at the moment.
He can copy, though, the Soul Mirror, but
sure.
Leaving a lot of damage on board. That gets quite scary as well because he knows Zephrys is a possibility. So this is just going to be the Sethek train turn, and if things don't get answered efficiently, he can still first end with the Wave of Apathy.
Okay, Gift of Luminance is interesting.
I mean,
did he not want to copy Karj there?
I think he wanted the rush minion, but I was thinking you take the rush minion if you also immediately buff it with Apotheosis, but that's not really getting a good trade.
Still a lot going on this turn. Trying to figure out exactly things that he could have improved on along the way is proving to be difficult.
For sure. Well, I think the main goal for Tyler there was just to get the Sethek train online and with Waves of Apathy, which is like making it so that the Sethek can likely survive or take some very awkward trades to get rid of for the next turn. Which he succeeded with that goal.
He did. The heart of the turn was there, the core of the idea. I still think that copying the Kaj, like I would accept giving my opponent's Kaj Divine Shield in order to have a 1-1 with a 4-12 inside of it with Divine Shield on my side of the board.
Well, for Tom, the Mass Dispel looks tempting, but I'm also just staring at the Zephyrus and Apotheosis and trying to find ways for lethal. It's just not there with so few minions, though. The value never stops.
It's crazy, isn't it? Because it felt like at the start of the game, Tyler had such an insanely high value hand. And while he does still have some plays to go for, you know, Raised Dead can get him some threats, Lazul can get him some decent threats from Tom's hand, it's far from endless. It's going to start running out.
I mean, if we review the early game as what is insanely high value was the Vulpera Raised Dead into Vulpera Raised Dead, but the problem is the other minion it was bringing back was Wild Pyromancer, which is very low value in the matchup. So it was quickly by the insane Elusia turns from Tom.
Tom, again, I think here will be hesitant to just snap Tyrion because of the power of stealing minions in this matchup, which is why instead we do see a more conservative line of Sethek Veil Weaver Train, which I think is very, very smart in this matchup. You don't want to be too aggressive, I find, with your use of Zephyrus because it can be turned against you.
Yep. He's also hand dumping towards either Zephyrus or Murazond. Right, either Elusia or Murazond. And the tempo game plan just makes sense with Tom having the Zephyrus in hand. He's held on to it for so long, probably saving it for a big lethal play, or if not, something like Tyrion.
It's that awkward thing, isn't it, where it's not actually having the combo that's the important thing, it's the threat of having the combo that's the important thing. He needs to just save it so that Tom can't play his powerful Zephyrus turns later on.
Speaking of combo, Tyler can steal away the opposing smaller Sethek with just this Cabal Acolyte. There's a way to guaranteed steal the bigger one if he goes Penance first, then Cabal Acolyte plus Wave of Apathy.
Yeah, it's powerful.
He can end with the Apotheosis as well, so he can immediately get one generation off of this Sethek.
Yeah, like it is strong. It's very, very powerful the turn he's making here. But this is the trump cards he's using here. This is the best turn he's going to be able to make for a long while. And what this says to Tom is, of course, now he has the liberty to start popping off here.
Or just do the exact same thing. And if it works out for Tom, it's absolutely huge.
That too. Oh.
Your mind is not
Okay, probably the worst possible order to get things, but the buffs did land on his Murazond, so overall, a win for Tom. And Tyler is back to the drawing board. He could be the first to blink and rip the Soul Mirror. Oh, I forgot there's one more spell in there. That's my bad.
Yes, yeah. Well, I mean,
So
that was
does
the
become
one
perfect.
that was the one he cast from hand, right? He has to play the Holy Smite. In order
All
to
right, this
activate it.
ising with my mind. I'm really sorry.
Yeah.
So the Soul Mirror is my first instinct here, but he doesn't have a targeting spell to immediately use with the Sethek. Problem is, if it's not Soul Mirror, he's not dealing with the Murazond.
So
You could
it
see
just be
Lazul first.
true. I mean, it could start with Master Spell in order to dig. That does take some of the threat off the board with obviously the generation that Sethek can afford you.
The future is
I'm just seeing Murazond as a bigger threat than the Sethek at the moment. And the Master Spell means you don't have mana left for Soul Mirror, but now Zephyrus is available.
He'd rather have Soul Mirror than Zephyrus in the matchup. That is surprising.
It is surprising.
Like, Soul Mirror is a fantastic card, don't get me wrong at all. But Zephyrus, at the very worst, can just be used to clear the board with Twisting Nether as well.
The Zephyrus, of course, is way more flexible, but it could be that Tyler's thinking that he doesn't need those options of hold on to Zephyrus for a lethal later on. I think Tyler feels like he needs to be the responder here, in which case you can make an argument for Soul Mirror being better than Zephyrus, because a lot of the time it's not just a board clear, but a board refill.
Well, I'm curious to see how it plays out nonetheless.
Just needs to be a bit careful about these trades because all the minions on the far right side, the Breath of the Infinite, he knows there's likely a Wild Pyro resurrected by Raised Dead at some point. So, I like this, leaving one guy at high health instead of all of around 2 or 3.
Okay, well, there's the Zephyrus you ordered anyway.
This is a very low value Soul Mirror.
Yeah. The problem is really just how you clear up the Sethek at the end, which does kind of need to die, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, Pyro Ring.
It's a lot of card use, but it's very low value cards, and Tyler does end up with a pretty good half of his Raised Dead. Kronks, easy pick. That looks about average for Tom.
It does, but what it does mean is that is a turn where Tyler's board hasn't been removed all of a sudden. He can try and capitalize on this, tension in the board state that has arisen here. A couple of different ways he can try and go about it, of course, like buffing his minions with Kronks is kind of tempting after playing Swampoo's, perhaps. Just going for... Ooh.
Or I'm looking at Kronks for an 8/8 here.
Okay.
Just to say that if by any miracle this sticks, then the Zephyrus can put Wind Fury on it, something like that.
I can see that.
If we do look at the Kronks buff, then of course he gets some nice clean value trades, so I can see the merit in that as well. But he's going Kronks AoE instead.
Oh yeah, he also gets the classic draw and activation, the rarest of Kronkses.
I forgot that this Galakron was discovered.
Yeah.
Oh man. Okay, so the Karj Shadow or Death looks pretty clean.
And again, like, Zephyrus here could be used for an Edwin, which would be pretty big here, just to get an 8/8 on board. But Tom is holding back. He's got a very, very clear designation that this Zephyrus needs to.
And suddenly, Tom is falling behind on value because his Galakron has been very late. It's in the bottom 5.
True. That is true.
Your wish is my suggestion.
So he is just gonna go Tyrion here. Doesn't seem very likely to get there.
And now Tyler has to be thinking, right, how do we capitalize on this? He's got Zephyrus, he's got Elusia. Something has to be able to be done.
Even the Soul Mirror has an argument for it.
Soul Mirror, Zephyrus, Silence? In order to take out the weapon from the other side, it feels a little bit low value.
Master Spell, but then you can't play Soul Mirror on the same turn. If you go Pyro Soul Mirror, does it cancel the shields before the attack. No, it happens. So
100%, yeah.
it is not going to work out very cleanly.
Thy blood
Gonna go digging first, alright. I don't mind a Soul Mirror turn and hold the Zephyrus.
time is running out.
Yeah, I think he's just going for Hex in the end. Just saying, there's not really any clean way to get the Tyrion from my opponent, so let's just deal with the sword this way.
And while the Elusia was a big pickup for Tyler, it's also signaling him that he wants to dump a little bit more so as
Right.
not to give Tom the Zephyrus. That could be another reason why we saw it that early from Tyler.
Okay, I agree. Evasive Draconid is the way to go, although Nosdorm always has to be tempting.
It was tempting. I mean, if that rest of the mana was just used on hero powering there, was it really worth going for the evasive?
I mean, I hear there's a pretty big ping rate difference between Taipei and the Netherlands.
Just Galakrons for days. That's actually pretty insane for Tyler to pick up because it's a Soul Mirror that he doesn't need to use to get through this evasive Dragonid.
I mean, at this point, it's like a clown car in which 20 Galakrons are all just pouring out of over the course of the game.
I am beyond.
Hey, there we
Oh
go.
man. No matter which way you slice it, it looks like Tyler's in the lead. But because we're in this situation where both players have Elusia in hand again,
Right.
we could see Tom go for some nutty double
Oh
Elusia
my
play.
god. It gets so weird. It gets so weird.
Last Giant is also very relevant pickup because it's so cheap that
Mhm.
Tom can get it down before the Elusia is played. Doesn't change the fact that this current board is a huge problem for Tom though. The health on the Skeletal Dragon, more than Kronks can get through.
Proto Drake as well is such a nutty dragon to get here. As long as it's not stolen in any way from Tom, which I think is not able anymore, it's
Alright.
going to be huge.
The Penance pickup is low-key nutty for Tom here. We really are just looking at Tom going for a double Elusia play again. Of course, he doesn't
Right,
know that
right.
this new Elusia is in Tyler's hand, but he's setting up for one Elusia to begin with. He's gonna get it because there's no way Tyler's gonna Elusia with this many cards in hand.
And now, if Tyler can find nothing better on this turn, despite his myriad options, Soul Mirror, clear the board, and he's probably just winning this game of Hearthstone.
Yeah, because even if Tom goes Elusia and then ends with Tyler's Elusia, he'll only have 4 mana to play with in
Right,
terms of
right.
stealing Tyler's cards. Not too relevant. By that point, you probably don't end with Elusia because you don't like the hand you're starting from Tom's perspective.
Yeah, I think the idea is that you play Elusia, try and play a big threat like Siamat or Kronks or something, and then after you would have to have used up all your removal cards at that point first, so that Tyler can't respond for a turn, and then maybe you can seize board enough to get there, even though it seems unlikely.
Well, Tom does have to rip it though because his hand is doing nothing. Can take a reroll with Tyler's.
Share your thoughts with the class now.
And so the best thing Tom can do with 7 mana, looking at Kronks, but the Sathak isn't that
He-
threatening, right? Because Tom knows that
Change your mind.
Tyler's
Yeah.
hand that Tom has given him can't.
I mean, I was almost looking at there if it was worth going Mass Dispel just to draw the last card from Tyler's deck and speed up his fatigue.
And then Tyler just gonna use all of Tom's cards. So we're looking at Tom working with just this board and his hero powers. And it's not gonna get there against Kronk, so I'm still a bit surprised that we didn't from Tom's stolen turn.
Yeah, I mean, I think no matter what you do there, he knows it's not getting there, because if he plays Kronks, he knows that there's Shadow Word Ruin in hand, so the board is just instantly wiped.
Yeah, no matter which way you slice it, there was just too many resources that Tom couldn't use up all in one turn. And this is the legacy of an earlier Galacron for Tyler, which I really thought would have been offset by that insane turn where Tom had double Lucia in the mid game.
Yeah, I thought so too. The tempo counteracted each other, and even the insane stealing with Elusia ended up not being the most important turn. As cool as it was to see, it was just too much value being generated from Tyler over the course of the game.
Sorry, the little brittle boat not doing much here.
Well, have they activated because he took fatigue on that turn?
They were green-yellow.
Ah, interesting. I wonder if that's how that's supposed to work.
Job's done.
Yeah. Does your draw technically happen before your turn?
Before your turn? Oh,
Wait,
no, there we go.
Huh? I could have sworn that was green the other turn.
Could you, Gia? Suspicious.
And also, but Tom would definitely play one, right? If he could that turn.
Yeah.
This is
Not
the
that it
second
matters.
strange thing we've seen this weekend. The other one being that spellburst activation.
I mean, 50-50 there as to what the minion could have been that was generated off of the hero power. Tyler gets it correct.
Is not your turn.
Yeah. Despite there being some wonky things going on at the end of the game there, doesn't change Tom's fate. He is just going for all of the hero powers he can to maybe rip an Elusia and find a miracle, but it did not happen. So that's Tyler's first win on the board.
Yeah, light spawn, but no light at the end of the tunnel for Tom on that one. It was an unfortunate way for the match to go, I think, given the very cool plays that Tom made along the way. But in the end, it was still a well-deserved victory from Tyler, as we've just been notified that it was the armor that changed value, not his health total itself. So the Brittle Bones working as intended. Great job, Hearthstone. It turns out, as expected, we're the dummies on that one. But now Tyler, with his Priest obviously left intact due to this being last hero standing, he has a couple of decks that he needs to try and reverse sweep on Tom's side of the board, with the the Warrior being banned, Priest being knocked out. It's now Demon Hunter, which I think could be kind of a close matchup based on what we've seen so far. And then the Zoo Warlock from Tom, which from what I hear, one of the main reasons why you want to bring it is specifically because it has a chance to just dumpster Priest right out the gate.
Yeah, I am definitely expecting that one to feud up. The Warlock is able to just spit out an entire hand, just get down, I don't know, 20 worth of stats if a Dark Lair manages to stick early. And a big reason for Dark Lair having an engine is the Raise Dead. So we see Tom keep one in hand immediately. The other engine for the deck is the card drop package with Expired Merchant and Hand of Gul'dan.
Okay, there's a lot of the, this is all sauce at the moment. There's no actually meal right here. This is all the condiments, whereas he needs the actual meat of Hand of Gul'dan, Dark Glare, the cards to actually make this a real meal of a hand.
So it's currently an amuse-bouche.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really crap one. It's just like a bit of ketchup on a plate, which isn't a very amusing my bouche.
Right, I'm not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole, but doesn't change the fact that Tyler's opener was very, very powerful indeed. He picks up Power Infusion, which will guaranteed have a target on the File Fiend for next turn if he wants. All of the choices are nuts, I have to say.
Yep, I really, really like this option with the Vile Fiend in play. This is a great way to lock down the board, because this is what you got to do against the Zoo. Removing for as long as you want eventually is going to run out, because they're going to keep drawing cards, keep developing over and over again. You got to hit proactive domination of the board, which is exactly what Power Infusion does.
Very curious turn from Tom here, where he is trying to free up space in his hand because he wants to keep tapping, and he's tapping towards Hand of Gul'dan, which you also need more space for. But trading in the Tour Guide there immediately just so the Volterra couldn't trade over the Expired Merchant without a heal was something that I did not spot.
Powerful plays are going to start coming, though, for Tom. It can only be so long before these Flesh Giants start working. You know, a Dark Glare is found, Hand of Gul'dan is found. Something to make this pop.
Stones
I mean, yes, that's true, but everything Tom has done so far has been damaging himself, and this 5-9 is just looking to close out the game in a couple turns. Or at the
True.
very least, just take this value trade and make things very tough for Tom. We've seen Tom, though, go for these very patient game plans that are not the ABCs of the deck, holding on to a bunch of Flesh Giants and getting them all down on the same turn.
I love this from Tyler. It's, again, just trying to lock out the game right from the start. He's seen that Tom clearly doesn't have the hand. He hasn't hit the nuts this game. And so he was relying on this strong development at the start to get there. But with the pickup of Broomstick, Tom has a clear now, at long last, on this must-kill Vile Fiend.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that it's a must-kill. Rush out the 8/8 and use the Broom Rush. And he's doing that type deliberately just to get 1 mana extra.
That's pretty clever.
Yeah, I like that. It's a full clear now because he fits in the Guardian Merchant as well.
And he gets an 8/7 on the board. That was really, really smart. Deliberately overdrawing, and he gets an 8/7 on the board as a result. That is huge.
It really, really is. And this is the hidden value of the expired merge, well, just multiplying his Flesh Giants, even though it's
Right.
indirect. But Tom is just down to 8 HP now. It's getting extremely scary.
But he's
Going-
got so much pressure. Look at this board. It's lethal next turn.
He's just... I thought he was going to go all in with the Flesh Giants. He's still hedging a little bit towards Soul Mirror, I have to assume.
Yeah.
But the downside of that is now Tiamat.
Keep him alive. Couple of ways to go about this again now, though, for Tom, as he gets himself down to 5 health right at the start of the game and misses out on the Flesh Giants.
He not only misses out on Flesh Giant, he misses out on Expired Merchant, which he was hoping to multiply some threats. Of course, by that point, it was going to discard the Nightshade Matrons, but better than nothing.
He's at 3! Gia, he's got himself down to 3 health.
He is just fearless. So now, if Tyler manages to copy a card in Tom's hand, that's just even if it's not that, Murazond can put an equal amount of threats on board. But is he just dead if it's Murazond?
Right, so Murazond gets him a 5/5 rush, and that's the only immediate tempo effect he would gain. Which is a little bit too scary, I think, to be honest.
I mean, if he can remove the 2/1 from the board, which he can with a 5/5 rush, then he's not dead to just 1 Soulfire. Problem is, Ray's dead.
the Ray's
It's him
dead
in
as well,
range
of
of 1
course.
Soulfire. We do see double Soulfire, but from Tyler's perspective, he can't be considering both of them in hand.
Oh!
That's just game. I can't believe how masterful Tom has been with this deck.
That was so sick. That tap to overdraw a card to get down the Giant in play. Somehow getting Tyler down to the perfect life total, even winning despite holding back the Giant to play around Soul Mirror. Getting both of the terrible tour guides there off of the Raised Dead when he much, much more heavily needed a Flesh Giant there to be able to threaten the lethal. On the last turn, you do have to question Tyler's choice to leave himself dead to literally 1 Soulfire. That's not an especially tall order from his opponent, when he could have gone potentially for the line of playing out the Cabal Cultist and playing Apotheosis on it instead, steal a minion, get a nice big life steal in play that could tank 2 hits potentially from the Flesh Giants. I think was a little bit more safe and could have led to a win there afterwards. But still, what a sick win from Tom. An absolute masterclass.
There was also a Galakron line, possibly for Tyler, with the Holy Smite into Galakron and try and hit a 2 and 3. But yeah, we really should be putting all the focus on Tom here, because yet again, he's proven that despite not having the Galakron or even the Hand of Gul'dan type of opener, just multiplying Flesh Giants and playing it what looked to be like a flashback to me of Handlock, it felt like, with just giant after giant coming down for extreme, and as you mentioned, that spot to overdraw to make sure he could also include the Guardian Aug merchant for a full clear was so sick. I'm just so blown away that this deck can be played a completely than I thought it was built to do.
As am I. I think that Tom has shown such great understanding of even the fringe cases that you have to play to at all points. A well-deserving player to get through to our finals to be played out as the final match of the day. Tyler, sadly, we do have to say goodbye to here for this week. But that's back-to-back top fours for Tyler, which puts him in very, very good standing to get through to Division A, no matter how things go for him in week 3 in Specialist, where who knows exactly how that could go with an entirely new metagame that will have to be developed for the players. But still good things from Tyler, even though he ends up losing. The real story now, though, Gia, is who has the honor of facing Tom in the finals, Surrender or Tiz? What are we thinking right out the gate?
I'm thinking I see a Warrior left up this time. I think Surrender has been banning Warrior pretty consistently, but maybe Tyler has just been the trailblazer for this line of thing where you don't necessarily have to ban it. Could also be that this particular list from Tiz is one that Surrender doesn't see as threatening. But again, the fact that Surrender doesn't have Bomb Warrior means that we're always seeing different bans come out when people face his lineup. This time it's Rogue.
Right, and that's the second Rogue ban that we've seen today, despite there being only 14 Rogue bans, I think, over the entire weekend so far. So this is number 16 that we're seeing here from Tiz getting rid of Surrender's Rogue. And I think what it speaks to, again, is how well it plays against these control decks. In a Warrior deck that runs, no weapon destruction, it doesn't have the sticky finger, it doesn't have the ooze. The Rogue, I think, is honestly just going to dominate that matchup. And so it's really not a bad ban at all from Tiz. In terms of the Warrior, the Mage and the Demon Hunter, I think, is where things get a bit more interesting, because those two decks, in my opinion, have a pretty decent matchup against the Rogue.
Yeah, I thought so as well, but be that just the certain version from Surrender, people feel that they cannot outpace the weapon damage. It really just goes to show the difference between including oozes in your list and not. For Surrender, it doesn't change the fact, though, that his Druid is left up, and that's a deck that he has been performing extremely well with. And if I recall, he's been starting off most of his matchups with it, and we did get the news that he is queuing up Druid for game end.
Oh, it's so interesting from Tiz, the ban there, because I was about to say, well, first of all, I was going to say you should ban the Warrior, but again, Surrender doesn't have one, so that's off the table. Then I was going to say you should get rid of the Priest, because with Sticky Finger and Ooze, as well as Raise Dead and Zephyrus to bring them back and get more weapon removal, his Warrior could struggle there, but he has double Horde Pillager in his Warrior list, which then again makes it a little bit more amenable in the Warrior matchup. In the Priest matchup. It's so many layers deep there in terms of all the different matchups that you're trying to consider. And while I don't hate the Rogue ban there, it doesn't strike me as like a genius idea to ban the Rogue. It's just probably the best of a fairly dire situation for him.
And I can't help but think, I wonder if these players did some additional testing over the past couple days, that they've changed their ban strategies compared to the Swiss portion, or if it's because of these specific lists. It would be very cool to get the thoughts of the players directly. I'll definitely be asking a couple of the people after the day goes up, but it's just something that makes me wish that we had several weeks of LHS instead of one to have this sort of pocket meta, so we could really break down what is the right way to approach it. For right now, though, it will be that Druid queued up first, right out the Warrior, which I've always gone back and forth of who I think is favored here, but when we're looking at the lists that are a bit more focused on the weapons, then I feel like Warrior has a leg up. But Tiz's list has just the one upgrade, and it's still running some things that have been cut out in the more streamlined version, like Whirlwind here.
Yeah, it's running Whirlwind, double Sword and Board, Quartermaster, double Coerce. Like, this is a very controlled version of the deck in one sense of the word. I think you could definitely argue. The main thing being that it's cut the weapon, the pirate package from the list in order to make room from that. It still has Horde Pillager, of course. So I think even though it's cut some of the really good cards in the matchup, like one upgrade in Greenskin, it does also have some pretty good cards in the matchup. The extra removal can be nice at keeping the board clear, being able to coerce a Ysera off the board, or maybe one big minion later on is very powerful. And also Galakrond in there at the end. Cutting all these pirates has, I think, made him in a decent spot, actually, against Druid, even if he's lost some of the weapon buff cards.
Yeah, the Galakron Kronks package I feel is something that we don't see very often in APAC, but against Druid, I do imagine that it has synergy with cutting the pirate pack, likely to draw, say, another Horde Pillager to give you that additional weapon charge. In a way, it feels a bit more in with the spirit of just relying completely on the wrench calibers. I don't think that Sword and Board will be particularly useful though, and I could see as a downside of not running Skipper, of course, is you don't have the battle rage cycle. So even more important that you get the Corsair caches and wrench calibers early.
Yeah, of course, makes it harder to activate Lord Barov, kind of by an example, without the skipper, but then you have Sword and Board. So that's another way to actually kill off a board instantly with Barov. It's a very kind of plus and minus on all aspects by cutting out the pirate package. But I will say that it's far from a miserable, unwinnable matchup for the Warrior here. He's got a very good chance of taking things down from Surrender, especially bearing in mind that Surrender's list is kind of the old school version with Kael'thas and double survival of the fittest, which in one aspect makes it very scary because you can explode onto the board very, very quickly and make it so the Warrior doesn't have time to find their removal. But if you look at it through another lens, it's not running the Mount Sellers, it's not running the Malagos, all of these extra win conditions that a lot of the other versions have taken to putting in their list, which means there's not actually that much value. It's more just a lot of scary pressure up front with early survival of the fittest coming down. So if Tiz can find the removal, I think he's got a good chance of outlasting most, if not all, of the Druid threats.
Yeah, it's true. For this particular list, Druid, without the Mount Sellers, you can kind of treat that as one or two less brawls that you might need to expend. And also the fact that the coerces are there for the Warrior is very, very relevant because every single minion is countable at this point from the Druid when you're not running the Mount Sellers. And the single target removal can come in a pinch spot where Surrender with the hedge around playing around both of them, not just the chorus, but also the brawl. And that's the toughest part. Can I just maneuver my board into having 2 or 3 minions instead of going overly wide or all in on one? And sometimes you can't control that when Ysera is added into the equation.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? Having both single target and wide board removal is very powerful because Warrior has kind of struggled with the single target, I think it's fair to say at the moment. Shield Slam having to carry the lion's share of the work, and when your armor is whittled down, that becomes significantly more difficult to do so. Moving on to some of the other decks as we wait for the players to get set up in the matchup. I think the real question point for me in terms of the overall strategy for Tiz revolves around the Demon Hunter, because he wouldn't have specifically anticipated an exact lineup from Surrender to be going up against, of course. But if you're bringing Demon Hunter and banning Rogue, it does for me start to raise some questions of the overall strategy of your lineup, especially if you think Demon Hunter with Ooze isn't good enough to leave Rogue up and try and get a counter queue.
It's really tough because the Ooze can come in handy for several matchups, not just Rogue, of course, Warrior, and for the Mirror. And I stand by my point where I feel like this meta is, despite it being LHS, you don't really have a set deck that you absolutely want to counter queue into anything. I don't even feel like there's many 60% matchups, let alone 70. I feel like everything is hovering around the 55% margin to call it already. And so it could be that the inclusion of just as a card that has potential targets in several matchups that are common to happen, not necessarily things that is bringing Demon Hunter to target specifically.
I mean, it's a good point you bring up about the meta being very close to the 50% mark. If we look at overall win rates of the different archetypes, we can see number one is Rogue with a 51.9% win rate, which is very, very close to even. And then the worst that you goes down to is Demon Hunter, actually, interestingly enough, with a 43% win rate, with a decent sample size. You know, there's Warlock that doesn't have too many games that's rocking a decent win rate, but it's surprising to me to see Demon Hunter quite so low down when you and I were hyping it up quite a lot last week. But as you can tell, we are trying to fill for time while we try and wrangle Surrender, find out where he's gotten to. So while he does his hair, whatever he does to make himself the gorgeous man that he is, We are going to go to an ever so slightly quick break to find him, get him into game, and when we come back, the second semi-final of the day, Surrender versus Tiz. We'll be right back.